My name is Gilles Ivaldi. I work at Sciences Po in France, in Paris. I was the co-editor of the report with Emilia Zanchina, and I did the French chapter. And I think France is a very relevant case because we do have, as you may know, quite a variety of populist parties in France, both left and right. And it just so happens that all those parties have taken pro-Russian positions in the past for different reasons. To the far right is because they very much like Putin, his leadership style, his authoritarian style, nationalism. On the left, it's more like anti-Americanism and anti-NATO positions that have driven pro-Russian positions. But anyway, we had, with the outbreak of the war, we had a very interesting case in France because we wanted to know how those populist parties they reacted to the war in France. And what we've seen is, just like in the rest of the report, we've seen quite a variety or a wide range of responses and how those parties, they've tried to adapt to the new context produced by the war. If I start with Marine Le Pen, she was clearly very successful because she understood she had to distance herself from Putin and Russia very quickly. And that's what she did. She condemned the invasion very quickly. And what she did was very clever because she realized that very soon people in France will be more concerned with domestic issues rather than the war itself. So what she did, she turned very quickly to domestic issues. And in France, we've been going through this inflation crisis, and the cost of living issue has become very important. And that was the number one issue in the French elections of 2022. And that's where I think Marine Le Pen was very successful, moving from a classic, nativist, nationalist agenda to a more, what I call myself, a social populist agenda, talking about domestic issues. What is interesting is that if we look at the other far right or populist radical right candidate, who was Éric Zemmour, he did something completely different. Somehow he was more ambiguous in condemning Putin and Russia after the invasion. And people could sense he was still very much sympathetic to the Russian regime for different reasons, but mainly for ideological reasons, and what I would call some almost civilizational views. He sees Putin, as the true patriot, the one that embodies the values of nation, Christianity, conservative values. And for that reason, he was very, very ambiguous in condemning the invasion. And he didn't quite manage to turn to domestic issues just like Marine Le Pen did. He stuck with a very radical strategy, a very, endorsing extreme right themes and ideas. And he was not very successful in the election. He won 7%, which is still good for a newcomer, but not the sort of support he was expecting. And finally, if we look at Jean-Luc Mélenchon, the leader of La France Insoumise, which is the left-wing populist party, then we have a very interesting case because he was, again, slightly ambiguous after the invasion, trying to condemn Putin, but he was obviously very embarrassed by his own previous positions vis-à-vis Russia. But in the end, he clearly condemned the invasion and he took a very different stance. And what he did, just like Marine Le Pen, he turned to domestic issues. So France, I think, is interesting because it has illustrated in this report some of the strategies that populist parties used after the war, and especially right-wing populist parties. And what we've seen is that they have adapted to the context. They have shifted their positions to adopt, the mainstream position, especially on refugees, for instance. We know those parties, they are nativist parties. Usually they are very much against immigration. And yet, during the crisis, they've adopted more pro-refugee or more open stances on welcoming asylum seekers from Ukraine. And that was very clever of them. Something, by the way, that Zemmour didn't very much do, and he was again very ambiguous on that question, on that issue as well. So we've seen that those parties, they have adapted, they have changed, they have shifted their positions, and I think somewhat it reflects their broader strategy in the party system. Marine Le Pen is trying, as you probably know, trying to normalize her party. She wants to make her party look more like a mainstream party. She wants to take a party away from the extreme right reputation. And her strategy of navigating the Ukraine war is very much in line with that strategy of normalization. And that's something we didn't see in Zemmour, who again pursued a more radical strategy. So it's interesting because, and that's something we see in the report more broadly, we can understand the strategy of those parties by looking at their trajectory within their respective party system.